Scout Network Leader Program, and other initiatives meant to put people in business on the investing side. So we think it's two sides of the same coin.
Can you give us more details about the program?
So applications are open today. We are going to respond very, very fast. We're going to have a 48-hour SLA from the interview, and the interview should also be scheduled within the a few days after application. And the program starts in January officially, but we've already onboarded some companies that are starting now because due to our custom process, we're taking companies that a couple of them need to fundraise right now. So you're never too early to join the accelerator. So if you're building right now, feel free to apply both for ODX and for ODF. If you go to the ODX website, we have a few info sessions with people you can talk to. If you're considering it, we have lots of testimonials and from people who've done ODF and VGA and can tell you more about it as well. So yeah, hope to see people apply.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of everyone at Village Global, we're so excited for the On Deck team to be launching and announcing ODX. We're so proud of the hundreds of founders we've backed here at Village Global these last 4 years in our Village Global Accelerator. I think that this next chapter, reimagining what an accelerator looks like in the 21st century by leveraging all of On Deck's unique community assets, is such a brilliant offering and will be so valuable to so many startups to come. So we're really excited to support On Deck in this new initiative and encourage founders who are thinking about their next idea to apply to On Deck Fellowship and then ODX to raise their initial round of capital. And we at Village are going to be excited to invest in the pre-seed and seed rounds of many of the great companies coming out of ODX in the years to come. So David, congratulations. Eric, congratulations. And from all of us at Village, onwards and upwards.
Thank you both. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great episode. Usually I'm on the interview side, so it felt good to be interviewed, and really grateful for this great partnership in terms of all of it's given us and all it will give us for years to come. If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc. Hey everybody, it's Eric Tornberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts.
Welcome to Venture Stories from Village Global. I'm Ann Duane, co-founder and partner, joined today by Lucas Fogno, my fellow investor here at Village, for a conversation with the inspiring Andy Rachleff. Andy Rachleff, as you might know, is co-founder and CEO of Wealthfront. Andy also serves as a member of the Board of Trustees and chairman of the Endowment Investment Committee for the University of Pennsylvania, and he's a member of the faculty at Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he teaches courses on technology entrepreneurship. Previously, Andy co-founded the legendary Benchmark Capital, one of the world's premier venture capital firms. Benchmark's invested in companies including eBay, OpenTable, Snapchat, Twitter, Uber, and much more. And Andy's led investments in Blue Code Systems, Equinix, and Jupiter Networks. We wanted to kick off a little bit about Wealthfront. And can you share what was the insight that led you to start Wealthfront?
Sure. Well, I had reached the point in my career at Benchmark where it was time to retire. We have a unique structure at Benchmark in that it's an always equal partnership. And the only way to operate an always equal partnership is to make sure there's enough pie to go around. And the only way that you can do that is if the older partners get out of the way. The data is really clear in the venture industry that it's the younger partners.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Tornberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by a very special returning guest, Ben Reinhardt. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.
So So Ben, you are a research fellow at the Astera Institute and creator of PARPA, Private ARPA, which we'll get into the episode. And you wrote this really fantastic piece the other month, shifting the impossible to the inevitable, a private ARPA user manual. I want to talk about the inspiration for this piece and what led to you writing it.
So the inspiration for the piece, very high level, was frustration with the fact that the current institutional structures that we depend on to sort of make there be more awesome sci-fi stuff in the world felt inadequate at doing their job, and felt like there's a real gap there. So I started digging into that and started digging into how DARPA works, and sort of realized that, or at least came up with a hypothesis that it might be possible to replicate the DARPA model in a private setting. And so that was really the inspiration, was like, okay, it might be possible to riff on the DARPA model, and if so, how would you do that? And so the entire piece basically fell out of that as a giant memo to myself. And the sort of intention of it was both to lay out very clearly what I'm trying to do with actually building PARPA as an institution, but then also hopefully lay down a lot of more general ideas that other people can pick up and run with as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for this episode is because this audience is among others, a venture audience, and so they understand how startups are created, how they're legally structured, how they're funded, how they make money, different business models, but they may not be as familiar with. They might ask, "Hey, why do we not have crazy sci-fi shit in the world? Given we have this venture model, and listeners are very familiar with it." How would you sort of, before getting to some details of the piece, how would you sort of say, hey, what's incomplete about this model on either the legal structure side or the funding side or commercialization side, or maybe we can take them one by one if it's easier.
Totally. So, for the record, I think that venture capital and high growth startups are really great at a certain class of activity, and really sort of bringing things to market and bringing them up to scale. The trick is just that there's a set of incentives that make it so that there's a sort of a class of work that is hard for startups to do and hard for venture capital to fund, and that's work with very high uncertainty around the technology in the market. So you think about it from a venture capital standpoint, and it's you have a fund and you need to return a pretty large amount to your investors, and you're sort of competing with many other asset classes on returns. And so the sorts of things that venture capital needs to invest in are things that can create massive returns on fairly on 10-year timescales. And 10 years is a very long time in some domains. 10 years, in software, 10 years is a really long time. But then in terms of really developing new physical technology, it's actually quite short. If you look at the time scale of, say, developing the transistor, we're talking about 15 years between really kicking off the project and even having a terrible first prototype. And so there's just this, and the time scales sort of keep dragging on. And so that's sort of one class of things that it's hard for venture to go after. And then also quite frankly, there's a lot of work where it's hard to capture the value that it creates. And so again, it has to do with return on investment. Is again, there's a lot of in sort of research, a lot of the value gets created by like people sort of like figuring out like the correct point in design space, which is actually like very hard. And then sort of like that knowledge, it makes it very easy for other people to take and run with. So like, in Venture, we talk about moats all the time. And like very often figuring out a point in design space has zero moat. And so, it might take you like 10 years of like fairly expensive research to get to that point. But once you get to that point, then everybody can sort of be like, oh yeah, like that's the right thing to run with. And then they go for that. And at that point, it makes sense to start investable companies. So so I would say like just like hard to capture value and long, uncertain research work are sort of like the two classes of things that venture capital is just not well equipped to go after.
You mentioned before we were talking the need for non-academic. Let's bring in other sort of organization structures too, right? Academia, corporate. When you talk about what is each's role in sort of the comprehensive innovation ecosystem?
So academia is really good at sort of coming up with generalized principles and really going deep. Like so academia is optimized for novelty, which is really great for like coming up with new ideas and approaches, and sort of like really like not blindly but like wandering around in the woods. It's optimized for projects that can be done by maybe like 2 or 3 people, and so it's very good at those sort of things. But it sort of runs into limits when you need sort of larger coordinated efforts. And also in academia, you don't get very rewarded for like good designs once the principle has been demonstrated. So that's sort of the niche that academia fills. Corporate labs struggle a lot in the modern world because at the end of the day, they really only get full support when they're doing work that supports the core product of the corporation they're working for. And they also sort of, in order to get that support, they really need to be part of an organization that's sort of pulling in monopoly rents. So I think that like Google DeepMind is a great example of a very healthy corporate lab because you can make this argument that they're really doing work that supports Google's sort of core product of search and computer related things. Whereas and Google sort of like has the monopoly, but like the fact of the matter is that there really aren't a lot of large companies that make sort of like physical products that are pulling in monopoly rents anymore. So corporate labs are sort of struggling. And then you have startups which are really good at scaling things that sort of like quote unquote work already and growing very fast. And then you also have like government labs that work on things that are useful for the government, but there's a lot of problems with that. And then there's sort of like a long tail of other institutions.
And so you start the piece by talking about the niche that industrial labs used to fill in the ecosystem, and then talk about why they no longer fill that niche. Why don't you unpack that?
Yeah, so industrial labs, sort of like the paragon of that being Bell Labs, but also GE Labs, like DuPont, and others used to fill this role in the ecosystem where they brought together people with sort of very academic mindsets, but at the same time also had like large engineering teams and were tightly hooked into the entire sort of like manufacturing pipeline as well, to sort of do what Arthur Probjanker termed solutions R&D, where it's still very much research, but it's targeted at creating something very useful and long term. And so the corporate labs used to really sort of fill this gap. People would sort of jump back and forth between academia and corporate labs, and they sort of gave us everything from like amazing plastics to the transistor, and modern computing. And over time, sort of like, it's like we look at increasing competition as a really good thing, and I think for the most part it is. But what it has done is it's sort of like squeezed corporate labs so that they no longer sort of have the slack to sort of do these like big exploratory programs.
Totally. So say more about how we can better fill that niche.
I have a hypothesis that we might be able to fill that niche with organizations that are riffing on the DARPA model, and that's sort of the hypothesis that I'm pursuing. But I think that what we really need to do to go after that niche is try lots of different things, frankly. So it's like I don't propose to have like the solution, but very broadly, I think what we need to do is figure out ways to create alternatives to academia where people can pursue research. We need to start thinking about funding research as philanthropy very seriously, and we need to think about just like sort of like alternative career paths for people who really want to build technology. Like right now, they can sort of go into academia, or they can go into a startup, and in some small cases, they can go work for corporate labs if they like have a CS degree.
I'm curious on the value capture side of things. One, do we think that's a big bottleneck that much more people would be going into it if they can make a lot more money off it? And then two, there's one idea I heard, I can't remember from who, that of sort of like a retroactive X Prize. Like you look, the people who made the transistor obviously created a ton of value, and inventions like that don't always capture the value, or don't often capture the value that their technology enables. And so is there a way where you could sort of give this enormous cash prize retroactively to people who create these game-changing as you mentioned design space innovations, and it could that serve as a looking inspiration for people, like, oh, if I create something really meaningful, maybe I'll get this $100 million or $1 billion, whatever prize. What are your thoughts?
So I don't claim to speak for everybody, but I think that the value capture problem is actually less for the people doing the work and much more for the people funding the work. I've talked to enough people, and like I'm one of them, where as long as we can like pay the bills and sort of like have a sense that like we'll not die in the gutter, I'm not like there's lots of people who are not actually out to get rich. The trick is where do our salaries come from, and like where's the money to like buy equipment come from, right? like research is really expensive because you need to get all these like bespoke machines and buy consumables and like rent lab space and all that good stuff. So it's like, where does that money come from? And so the value capture, I think, is much more a question for the people who are funding that work, more so than the people who are doing the work. So and so I would say like, yes, it's very much an issue there. I think that like a robust prize system absolutely could is one potential solution. There's people who have thought much more about this than I have, but you could imagine almost like if you had a robust prize system, you could like take out loans based on the prize, and so like the banks would underwrite the work to do the prizes. I'm not sure that it completely solves the problem, only insofar as like I sort of like to say that we stand on the shoulders of too many giants to count, in the sense that like we like to think that we can sort of like we can say like, oh, like this basically assign responsibility for an innovation, but at the end of the day, like as soon as you start like digging into who's responsible for anything, there's like this like cascade of people and organizations, and so it's like I don't like maybe someone smarter than me can figure out a way of like really assigning credit, but there's just like so much illegible stuff that goes on. It's like bar room conversations, or like this person talking to their neighbor over the hedge, that I don't think that retroactive prizes would completely solve it, but it would definitely be a step in the right direction.
What are other bottlenecks that you see that we haven't yet covered?
I think I touched on it very briefly, but there's I think a big thing about it, a big bottleneck is sort of what Michael Nielsen calls like shadows of the future, where I think like we sort of tend to ignore like the very human aspect of people's motivations, where it's like a lot of people want to have like family and kids and sort of like a life one day, and if you sort of like can't see what your career trajectory like, it makes it very hard to do that. And so we don't even like I fall into this trap where we propose sort of like ways to fund people and projects for some amount of time, but the thing that sort of academia offers is like an entire career trajectory. So like somehow we need the ecosystem to like offer alternative career paths, not just sort of like career waypoints. That's one bottleneck. I think a big bottleneck is also just like in the way that people think about philanthropy, in the sense that there's this with research, there's this really uncomfortable thing where it's like you can't, it really needs to be able to like wander and take as long as it needs and maybe not produce anything, and that's like very unsatisfying for people, like that it sort of does feel like wasting money. So it's like somehow we need to like change like how we're thinking about philanthropy away from this. I feel like there's a lot of attitude of like your and your like reputation is staked on this product,